Good evening. It's Saturday, the 23rd of August, approximately 9:10 p.m. And I am James Exum. My Yogi name is Sakshi, and I will be delivering a discourse this evening on Chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita. This is a transcript that I wrote myself in the last month or so, and it should be my 23rd or 24th video presentation on YouTube. The title of this course is Vasha's wisdom revealed through Shankara and Sakshi, which makes it a comparative discourse, of course. And I'll start reading it now. The Bhagavad Gita, composed by the sage Vyasa, stands as a luminous jewel in the crown of world spiritual literature. Its 18 chapters span a spectrum of philosophical thought, ethical dilemmas, and spiritual insight. Chapter 5, named Sannyasa Yoga, or renunciation and action, delves into the perennial debate between renunciation, sannyasa, and the path of selflessness, action, karma yoga. To illuminate Vyasa's wisdom, one must contemplate the commentaries of Sankara, the eminent Advaita Vedantin, and draw from modern interpretations, such as myself, who bring the Gita's universal relevance into contemporary light. Light being here used in the sense of contemporary knowledge. Darkness, of course, being the opposite of light, would indicate coming from ignorance to knowledge or from darkness to light. The setting of Chapter 5 lies with Arjuna's persistent questioning. He's torn between the call to action and the allure of renunciation. You will see I'm reading from my monitor, which is, of course, my computer screen, but it's actually a coaxial cable for a larger monitor. My eyes are getting, well, I'm older and I need a larger screen, is what I'm saying. I will remark occasionally by stopping in the middle of my reading to make commentaries, and that's what I'm doing now. This is an expletive commentary about why I'm using a larger screen, but I will also make commentaries on the words within this work itself. Arjuna asked Krishna, now this is quoting here, which is superior, the renunciation of action or the performance of action with detachment? Now this question, this interrogative statement, is actually the central core of this chapter. That one question sets the stage and a dialogue between Lord Krishna, who's acting as Arjuna's chariot driver next to the great battlefield, and Arjuna, the prince of the great house, is also a renowned archer, and Arjuna is feeling despondent, as was shown in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the text from which all this is being taken. So he asked him, which is superior, the renunciation of action or the performance of action with detachment? This dialogue pivots on to the means of liberation or moksha and the nature of true wisdom. This is a very important paragraph. If you have trouble keeping up with me, because I am a yogi and a yoga philosopher, then you're welcome to rewind at any time and take your time going through my words and my meanings here and teaching yourself along the way. That's how I did it when I was first starting, not with computers. No. When I was first starting, it It was a active library card and card catalogs in long wooden trays in large wooden cabinets, usually golden oak cabinets, in which all the book titles and their numbers, their shelf numbers, were all housed together. Let's move on. Yasa's poetic genius threads together the teaching of Krishna, who I just told you what's happening with him, who asserts that both sannyasa and karma yoga, when practiced with the right understanding, lead ultimately to freedom. Well, freedom is the whole point of practicing yoga. We want to get to the point of the liberation of the soul from samsara, which is the repeated coming back and being reincarnated until you work out all of the personal negativities that you have, and then the soul is enlightened and is allowed to go back and rejoin in a condition called Sat Chitananda, Sat S-A-T, Chit C-H-I-T, Ananda A-N-A-N-A-D-A, which means it means a blissful world. It means existence consciousness bliss is what it means. Sat is existence, Chit is consciousness, Ananda is bliss. You'll see a lot of yoga gurus and masters and swamis that have the last portion of their yoga name will have Ananda as the ending of it. So that Ananda means living in bliss or blissful. I could make my yoga name Sakshi Ananda, but I like the simple spelling, and I like the fact it's just 2 syllables. But that's just me. I'm a modern yogi. I'm not one of the ancient classical yogis like Shankara was. So Vyasa's poetic genius threads together the teachings of Krishna, who asserts that both sannyasa and karma yoga, when practiced with the right understanding, lead to ultimate freedom. The emphasis, however, is on the spirit in which the action is performed, the relinquishing of attachment and ego. Again, these are core definitions, core principles of this chapter, chapter 5. Adi Shankara, whose commentary on the Gita is both rigorous and compassionate, interprets chapter 5 through the lens of non-dualism, Advaita. Non-dualism is a classical philosophy of yoga, and it's also defined as not two separate things. People that practice the Advaita portion of yoga believe that the soul and Brahman, the creator, are one and the same, though seen in 2 different places at the same time. The soul can be here inhabiting the human body as a spark of the divine creation while the body survives on earth, but it's still part of Brahman. That's what they mean by it's not separate. It's separate in time and space, but it's not separate in its makeup. It is like a blood cell in me. If you drew it out of me and took it down to the corner blood lab and they looked at it under a microscope, they're still looking at a portion of me. I'm the creator of that blood cell. Well, the Atman, this is an analogy I'm creating right on the spot for us. Well, the Atman is like that blood cell. It's a part of the Brahman on loan to the human body, but it's much more than that. And if you go back and review my videos on Atman, the very first videos I did, you'll get the fuller understanding. Otherwise, you can just go to Wikipedia, or you can go to Yogapedia, look up those 2 terms, Atman, A-T-M-A-N, and Brahman, and you can look up Advaita, and you can piece it together yourself. But that's not what I'm here for tonight. I'm here to read this chapter and give my commentary on it. So for Shankara, the dichotomy between renunciation and action is resolved in the higher knowledge of the self, the Atman. He writes, this is Shankara, in his Bhagavad Gita Bhashya. Now that's one of his major works. And unless you're really, really schooled in the philosophy of yoga, having studied it for 5 decades like I have, or less, of course, most people have studied it much less because they haven't reached my advanced stage. But when you find that book online as a PDF, or you find it in a esoteric library somewhere, or even in a public library, you will be astounded at the complexity of the text and the meanings therein. So it's not, it's more of a doorstop than it is light reading, say, for a ride home on your college bus or high school bus or whatever. The text is meant for sages or for very advanced yoga students. I'm talking about the intellectual side of yoga, not the physical side. When you come to my or entertain me through your medium, and you listen to my discourses, my lectures, my talks, you are dealing with the intellectual side of yoga. You're not dealing with the physical side. Not that those teachers, the asana teachers, do not impart wisdom of this nature to you, but I would think, I'm not a betting man, but I would think that most of them have not taken the time, nor have they even had as much time on earth as I have, to be able to proclaim at this level to you the wisdom of the ages, which is a name I give to yoga itself. I also consider yoga a science. I do not consider it a religion. So I am not religious at all when it comes to any religion. I'm a follower of the yoga philosophy. So I'm more of a scientist in my religion, if I have religion, so to speak, than I am a religious follower. There it is. I'm a follower of science more so than I am a religious follower. So Shankara sees this dichotomy between renunciation and action. He knows it's resolved with higher knowledge of the self, the Atman, which is also the soul, which is also your conscience. And he wrote in his Bhagavad Gita Bhashya certain points. And I'm reading in this evening from that book that was translated by Swami Gambhirananda. Gambhirananda. There's that Ananda on the end, which means blissful. And his points that I've quoted here go as follows. The first point is renunciation is knowledge. Shankara explains the sannyasa. The sannyasa is not merely the abandonment of external action, but the renunciation of the sense of doership. Again, this is philosophy. This is not a high school course. This is not, as I said, light reading. This is not something you sit down on the couch with well, you might. I probably would. You normally don't see people sitting around on their couch. Well, they could be in their pajamas, with a bowl of popcorn, entertaining themselves by listening to my lectures. I don't think that's how it's going. But it's a whole, as Aldous Huxley said, it's a brave new world. So who knows what's really going on in real time, watching my videos? Who knows? And in fact, I really don't care one way or the other, because that's not something that concerns me. Yogis are not concerned by worldly activity as much as the common non-yogi. That's how I'll say it. So he says that it's identifying oneself as an agent of action. True renunciation is internal, rooted in the realization of non-difference between the self and Brahman. Well, that's what I said a few minutes ago. Advaita is the philosophy of thinking there's no difference between yourself, your soul. When we say self in yoga, we're not saying ego. That's more of a psychological name. That's something Jung and Sigmund Freud would be involved with. In yoga, we don't have the ego. Well, we have it, but we see it as sort of a, and I'm going to be very light in my comment here, we see it more as a nuisance. I was about to say troublemaker, but I drew that back. We see it more as a nuisance or something standing in the way of the progress of reaching moksha, which is liberation, as I said earlier. Then he goes on to the next point to talk about karma yoga as preparation. Action, when performed selflessly, purifies the mind. Well, I always give the allegory here that if you have a cup that's filled with 2 or 3 day old water and it's room temperature, and you're trying to pour fresh water in there, well, the cup's already full. So where do you pour the fresh water? It will commingle with the surface of that old water, but it will become contaminated, so it's basically no longer fresh water. So you purify the mind by emptying yourself of old concepts and ideas that no longer fit within the structure of yoga philosophy as taught by sages and rishis and in the great books of yoga, the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Vedic texts, and even some of the contemporary writers and their work, such as myself. I do write constantly on this subject. I haven't published it a lot, but now that I'm fully retired, both financially comfortable and physically comfortable and settled into my little home, I will be publishing more and more as time goes on. I'm in the works now, in the work of trying to prep myself and my work to go online, so to speak. Karma yoga serves as an essential discipline for those not established in knowledge. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Again, rewind if you want to take a second glance at all this and have a second chance of absorbing this knowledge. Shankara emphasizes that the renunciate and the karma yogin, a yogin is just a practitioner of yoga. A yogi is a practitioner of yoga at a much higher level, but we're still not swamis, we're still not gurus. We're more independent than that, and we're more private than that. When endowed with So the karma yogin, when endowed with the wisdom of non-attachment and are not different in their ultimate realization. The next point he says is the fruit of both paths, verses 5.6. That would be the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the 6th verse. State, quote, renunciation, O mighty armed, which is Lord Krishna's, one of the names Lord Krishna calls Arjuna during these 18 chapters. It's not a pet name, it's just another way of, he's pointing out some of his characteristics by using these names. So you'll see that a lot of gods, a lot of heroes in the yoga texts have multiple names. That's not uncommon, but it's just the way things were written in those days. It's a little more dramatic, I suppose. O mighty armed is hard to attain without yoga. Renunciation, O mighty armed, is hard to retain without yoga. The yoga yoked sage. Yoga means united. Yoke means that appliance, that apparatus that straddles both the shoulders of, say, 2 oxen. They're yoked together. The yoga yoked sage swiftly goes to Brahman. He's saying the higher you are in your connection with yoga and you're yoked to it, you and yoga pull the same load of philosophy and understanding and share it together, you share the load. There was a song back in the 70s or maybe 60s called, and I don't like the word ain't, but it's in the title, he ain't heavy, he's my brother. So that's being yoked together, even though you're not true fraternal brothers. O mighty armed is hard to attain without yoga. The yoga yoked sage swiftly goes to Brahman. Shankara sees this as an affirmation that action tempered by wisdom is the more accessible path for most seekers. Now, when you see me go off script here, which I wrote this, when you see me go away from actually reading the passages and I go into these explanations, think of that as my commentary. Even though I didn't write it into the discourse, you're still getting my commentary. So it's not like I'm some old man that's losing it and doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And yes, yogas can say hell and damn and rat's ass, and because we're not gurus and we're not swamis. So we can be a little more earthy in our conversation. It doesn't mean we don't believe the philosophy of yoga fully. We just believe that the morals and ethics of a yogi are a little looser than they would be, say, for a priest or a bishop or a cardinal or a pope or a swami or whomever or whatever. The unity of purpose is liberation from bondage. It is the Gita's great refrain echoing through Shankar's commentary. Well, I think that's enough of that. And then we could hear my modern perspective on this, and we'll skip through the introductory paragraph, and we will just go to the ending of that paragraph. And it says, I wrote that I draw from both Eastern and Western traditions, which I do, and my analysis of this 5th chapter centers on the transformative power of wisdom and action. Well, I've been saying that to you in other words. Then I have my bullet points here. I've been calling them points, but they're bullet points. And I'll go into those very quickly. Action in the world underscores the Gita's advice to perform one's duties without attachment to the results. And when I say that, I'm echoing Krishna's admonition, let not your attachment be to inaction. That's the 5th chapter, the 7th verse there I'm quoting. Integration of social and spiritual life. I taught that, and then I taught universal relevance. Now here I skipped over the second one, but here I'll go into great detail. I'm trying to save us time. Chapter 5 as I see chapter 5 as dissolving the boundaries between the mediator and the worker, the recluse and the householder. The path to wisdom is not linear, but encompasses both stillness and action, each informing and enriching the other. And my reading on liberation, again, it's my commentary, I return to the theme of equanimity as expressed in chapter 5, verse 18, quote, the wise look with equal vision upon a Brahman, a cow, an elephant, a dog, or even an outcast, unquote. This radical vision of sameness rooted in realization of the oneself is the fruit of both renunciation and selfless action. In other words, if you're really a follower, a deep follower with deep comprehension of the philosophy of yoga, you just see everything as being a part of the cosmos. There is and I'm not going to go into employment titles, but there are regular workers, and then there are middle management, and then there are owners and CEOs. But to a yogi like myself, one is no better than the other. We're all human. We all have that soul in us, which is a spark from the Creator. And we all came into this world under divine intervention by the Creator. The body will fall apart at the end of its time, its usage here on the earth. While it's here on the earth, it's merely a carriage by which the brain and the spinal cord, and more importantly, the soul, is transported around to do what they need to accomplish while they're here on the planet. But once this body dies, it is cast off like an old suit of clothes, and then the makeup of the body dissolves back into the elemental portions that made it up in the first place as an aggregate total. In other words, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And that's what that paragraph means. Okay, so now I went on and I started illuminating Yasa's wisdom. Well, you're saying to yourself, who is this Yasa character he keeps talking about? Well, he was the author. It's possible he was the author, but he definitely had a major hand in the composition of the Mahabharata, which I explained earlier, is the great book, and the Bhagavad Gita is a section of that was taken out and given its own importance, because it is incredibly important, and its own respect as a book standing in its own, on its own feet, in its own right. Okay, and then there's quotes in here from the Gita. I'm not going to bother with those. There's primary commentaries. I'm not going to bother with those. I will jump down, and I will say this: examining the contributions of Shankara and Sakshi. Now, I'm not equating myself with the great Shankara. I'm just presenting myself as a contemporary commentator of a very skilled level compared to most commentators. I'm not saying I'm better or worse. I'm just saying I'm highly skilled at this. Because there's multi-layered wisdom in which Vyasa, the writer of the Gita, and which came from the Mahabharata, there's multi-layered wisdom there. So you almost have to have, it's almost like speaking a foreign language. You almost have to have an interpreter come in to break this down be able to break this down into day-to-day language, so that the average reader, not that the average reader can't have a very high intellect and a high intelligence IQ, high IQ, but they still need to be well versed with all the historical context and text of yoga wisdom to be able to make any headway into the comprehension of what these texts are presenting as lessons to the yoga students, the aspirants, as they're called, right? They're aspiring, they're aspirants, is what they are. I call them seekers. They're seeking the wisdom of yoga. So again, there it is, Shankara with his path of renunciation, myself with the wisdom of Vyasa through Sakshi. My lens is the invitation to live fully and freely, engaging in the world without being bound by it. And the measure of wisdom is not withdrawal, but the ability to maintain equanimity and joy amid life's challenges. And I really think that's enough. And in fact, I know it is. Well, I'll give you the conclusion because I wrote it. And if you go through the trouble of writing a conclusion, you might as well read it to the to the person studying your discourse or hearing your discourse. The conclusion is chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita stands as a luminous guidepost to seekers. There's my word, seekers, torn between the call to action and the allure of renunciation. Vyasa's wisdom is as illuminated through Shankara's philosophical rigor and my contemporary insight. That is what I'm known for. Shankara was the master commentator. My role, if there's a role for me in the history of the philosophy of yoga, I will be seen as a contemporaneous yogi with vast insight in the great text of yoga. My contemporary insight reveals that liberation is found not in the abandonment action, nor in its fevered pursuit, but in the relinquishing of ego. To me, that's important. Remember, I talked about ego sort of as a stumbling block in yoga. It's not in psychology, it's not in psychiatry. But I see ego, I'm going to go ahead and say it very simply without, I hope I'm not insulting anyone in the professional world by saying this, but I see ego as sort of the bad boy. Ego tends to get you in trouble, whereas Sakshi, the soul, which is the true self of the body, because it's the wisdom speaker, that little voice that whispers right and wrong to you. I see Sakshi as the hero of the earthly drama within the human body. I see the ego as the bad boy that's kind of misleads you every once in a while. This is why we have the common phrase, oh, he's got such an ego on him. Well, that means he's self-important. Well, Sakshi is not self-important. Remember, I mentioned earlier in this that Sakshi is there to guide you, but his main role is to witness what your body and your mind and your physical activities are doing while you're on this earth. He is not allowed, and here comes that finger again, he is not allowed to interfere because of freedom of will. So the Gita teaches, what the Gita teaches is timeless. And this timelessness includes renouncing the fruits of actions, act with selfless dedication, and realize, and here's the thing that pulls it all together, realize that unity behind all is the diversity of the cosmos. And we'll end there. And now I'll give you, thank you for coming and thank you for being patient and listening to me. I have changed my setup here. Normally, I'm reading from a printout of my writings on my lap. So chapter 5, the discourse would be a writing on my lap. But I've decided I'm going to use my monitor. It makes me turn away from you quite often while I'm reading. But that's okay too, because I want to appear a little more professional in this. My very first videos were just, I'm going to go ahead and say it, they were just god-awful. I mean, but they weren't that bad. I mean, they were acceptable, or I wouldn't have published them. But I think I'm polishing my style as I go. Not that I want the rewards of the action. See, you have to be so careful in threading the needle, so to speak, when you're a yoga practitioner, especially an old yogi. I call it walking on the razor's edge. See, the Dharma karma path. Dharma being right action, the right lifestyle, the right way of existing, and karma, staying within the limitations of karma, so that you're always on the positive side of karma. Dharma karma, I call them the cousins. So here's the closing remarks I've been saying, and I'm going to go ahead and end this with my closing comments. Be good to yourself, my friends. But remember also to be good to each other, especially your family, your friends, and even strangers. And pass this saying that I'm saying to you, be good to yourself and others, on, so that who knows, in 5, 10, 15 years now, we all may wake up in a whole new revised world, because that advice was followed and spread throughout the planet. And then we can look at each other and say, oh, how wonderful society is now. Why could it not have been this way all along? Well, good night to you, and thank you again. If you enjoyed this, I'm happy. If you didn't, that's okay too. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but good night to you, and thank you.